Welcome back to the eHunter Newscast. I'm your host for this episode, Taryn Hunt. On today's podcast, I sit down with Wyatt Bubak of the Utah DWR. He's the law enforcement captain here in Utah. And we talk about the baiting bill that went into place recently. I think most everybody's aware of the House bill that was presented by Representative Casey Snyder. It's been a pretty hot topic article for us, as well as just a hot topic conversation piece on social media. And there's been a lot of questions circulating about what the bill really truly looks like, what people can and can't do with baiting in Utah, when they can do it, when they can't do it. And so on today's podcast, he and I sit down and we go into the weeds a little bit and talk about the nitty-gritty of this bill, and again, what we can and can't do here in Utah as it pertains to baiting. So if you are a person that uses bait for trail cameras, for hunting, for whatever purpose, this is one that you'll want to pay attention to so that you know the ins and outs of it, as well as what happens if the rules aren't followed. So I want to thank Wyatt for sitting down with me again. This is his second time on the show, and I'm grateful for him taking the time to chat with me and share the details behind some of these things. So I'm grateful for him and his time. Also thankful for Vortex Optics. They sponsor everything that we do here at eHunter. I mentioned this a couple times on the podcast, but they have some new stuff coming out in the next month. So stay tuned for that. We'll make sure and put it up on our stuff, but as well as on their page, you'll see the new product launches. So check them out, vortexoptics.com. Also want to send a shout out to Grim Reaper Broadheads. They're pretty amazing. We've had some Facebook discussions lately about the effects of the Grim Reaper Broadheads, and it sounds like a lot of people use them. A lot of people that I've actually known for quite some time use them and have been very successful with them. So if you are in the market for new broadheads or want to try something different, check out Grim Reaper Broadheads. It doesn't look like you'll be very disappointed in using them. They're pretty amazing. So appreciate them in sponsoring the podcast. All right, guys, let's jump right into it. Here's the podcast with Wyatt Bubak. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, share it around if you have any friends that may be interested in this, especially this specific episode talking about the Utah baiting laws. Make sure and send it over to them. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your support. Okay, everybody, welcome back to the eHunter Newscast. I am super stoked. I say that every podcast because I really enjoy these podcasts. I love being able to learn, and especially this one because, as most everybody knows, I moved back to Utah, and I'm really interested in what's going on in Utah as it relates to hunting and different regulations that are coming out and whatnot. And so super excited to have Wyatt Bubak with me again on the podcast. He was with me, oh goodness, it's been about a year, but Wyatt, you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Welcome, man. Welcome back to the show.
No, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and answer a lot of questions that people have. I feel like a lot of what we do here at eHunter is we're kind of that middleman. A lot of people will reach out and ask questions, and I know that they can reach out directly to you guys, but we're happy to facilitate some of those questions and then get on this and record with you all. So Wyatt, before we get started, I'm sure most everybody knows you and what you do, but for those that don't, if you wouldn't mind just kind of telling us a little bit about you and what you do.
Yeah, no problem. So my name's Wyatt Bubak. I'm a captain with the Division of Wildlife's law enforcement section here in Utah. And basically my role in my current position is kind of overseeing statewide operations. So I supervise ultimately all the officers in the field, and as well as their supervisors, make sure that everything's going smooth, that they have all the resources they need to perform their daily duties. And that's kind of the gist of what I do from day to day.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate all you do, Wyatt. Honestly, again, now that I'm a resident here, but even when I wasn't, I appreciate all you do for Utah, the wildlife here in Utah, and the sportsmen. You help us out a ton. So thank you so much for everything that you do.
Our pleasure. It is a genuine joy. This job is like no other. It's a blast. So happy to have it. Happy to talk to guys like you, and appreciate you helping get the message out here.
Oh, my pleasure. And I can only imagine. There's some pretty cool jobs out there, but I don't know that it gets much cooler than the job that you have, at least in our world. Guys like me that like to be out in the wild and be involved in this. I mean, you have a pretty sweet job.
Yeah, there's almost there's very, very rarely a day that I'm not excited to get up and go to work, especially in the field positions. Those conservation officers, they work their tails off, but man, they do have an enjoyable job. That's for sure.
Yes, they do, and that's what life's about, honestly. If you can wake up and be happy to go to work and enjoy what you do, I mean, hey, that's what life's about.
Yeah.
So,
100%.
awesome. Well, Wyatt, today we're going to talk about this new baiting bill and the things that have gone, that have changed and will change, I guess, here in Utah. We've put a couple articles up on our website about it. And I think that created more questions and comments from people. Interestingly enough, not just people that live here in Utah, but people that live all over that come to Utah. That they enjoy coming out and running their trail cameras and planning for hunts and things like that. And so, a lot of questions around this new baiting bill that was passed, and I believe it was Representative Casey Snyder, that was one that introduced it. But Wyatt, if you wouldn't mind, let's kind of start off by just talking about this new legislation. How did it come about, and what was the initial purpose behind this?
Yeah, no problem at all. So in the West, there's been a growing concern with chronic wasting disease, obviously routinely referred to as CWD. Colorado has concerns with it, and a number of Western states are currently have concerns with it or have growing concerns with it. So we had a mule deer working group that got together and talked about some chronic wasting disease concerns and how to limit congregations of big game animals, which is one factor that leads or helps the spread of CWD is having a bunch of animals in close proximity. And in those working groups, they identified bait or feeding or anything like that brings a bunch of these big game animals together as a concern that we wanted to try to help reduce. So the division as a whole started really looking at if we should be transplanting deer and being very careful about when and how we do that, as well as our feeding. And we still have options to feed during really bad winters, but overall we just looked at our programs and tried to identify where we could limit or eliminate these feeding type things. Baiting is one of those other ones that came up. And so that all started with the mule deer working group. And then obviously we had legislation this past year go through that made big game, the baiting of big game unlawful in Utah for the purposes of hunting. And there was a lot of discussions on that. It had 4 or 5 different substitutes. It had a lot of input at the committee and House and Senate floors. And ultimately, we ended up with the law we have now that makes essentially hunting over bait, unlawful. But it all stems, at least on our side, the division side, from concerns with the spread of disease.
That's actually very helpful, because a lot of the way that a lot of people are looking at this is they feel like the reason behind this was to kind of put restrictions on hunters, because they felt like that, maybe they felt like that hunters were being too successful in what they were doing. And so it's nice to hear that it wasn't just to get at hunters to change the way that they do things. It's nice to hear that there was a little bit of a biology behind it, for lack of better words.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, our major concern with this as a division is certainly the disease aspect of it.
Oh, that is really good to hear. And it does change the way that hunters go about their business. Most hunters, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of hunters in the West, that's what they do is, they run trail cameras, they bait, and then they continue to hunt that same area and hunt over that bait. And so it definitely will change the landscape of how hunters pursue game. But we can talk a little bit more about what that looks like here in just a minute. But another question I had for you was public input solicited on this decision? How did that process go? And I'll be honest, I'm a little ignorant when it comes to this, because I was in Colorado at this time and didn't get super involved during that period. But was the public solicited for information or thoughts during that time?
Yeah, so there was a lot of debate and public input provided, whether indirectly or directly. I'll get into those details, but basically on the committee floor, the public has the ability to kind of voice their support or opposition to those things. And we had 25 or 30 people from the general public voice their concerns there on the committee floor when this bill was being proposed. There was a ton of discussion on the House and Senate floor as well. Basically, that's where legislators are speaking for their constituents within the represented area, and there was a ton of discussion between legislators on this specific bill. So, as far as input, passion, and discussion tied to a new bill, this one had a lot, and so there was certainly public input heard on every level through the process on this bill.
That honestly is pretty comforting, because a lot of people felt, I keep saying a lot of people, and please, for everybody that's listening, don't misunderstand me here. I feel like it's a lot, but it probably wasn't that many. It kind of felt like it snuck up on them a little bit, and if you paid attention to the news releases, if you paid attention to the eHunter website, you kind of knew that this was coming. And so I'm glad to hear that the public had the opportunity to share their thoughts about it. And most decisions, I believe, made by the Utah DWR, or really legislation in general, they have that public input so that we can all, as hunters, outdoorsmen, or on the contrary, on the opposite side, saying different things, everybody has their input on it, which is pretty awesome. So
yeah,
why?
There's
go
a
ahead.
couple. Oh, no, I was just going to say there's a couple different processes that public input gets put in. Typically, most of our regulations or recommendations coming out of the division go through the rack and board process, and I can explain that more if you need me to. But that's the standard practice, and there's a lot of public input there. It's what the hunting public is more familiar with. It's not all too often that regulations pertaining to hunting and fishing or trapping go through legislation. And so this was, while not completely new, it's just less common than the rack and board process. So that may be one factor why people felt it snuck up on them, is because it didn't go through the more common channels. Still legally allowed and still completely appropriate, but just a different channel than it typically goes through.
Would you actually mind explaining that a little bit more, that rack and board process? There may be people that don't know, would you mind kind of explain that process in a little bit more detail?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do so, and it may come up later in this discussion as well as we talk about this House bill a little bit more. But so basically, RAC stands for Regional Advisory Councils. The state of Utah is divided into 5 regions: the northern, central, southern, northeastern, and southeastern. And each of those regions have a regional advisory council. When the division has proposed rule changes or management changes, number of permits that they're going to offer, or whatever it may be, new allowed weapons, let's say, they'll take those recommendations through each and every one of those racks. And the public has an opportunity to hear those presentations, hear the information that the division's presenting, and at these rack meetings, and then the public can voice their opinions to the rack board. The rack board will then vote on those recommendations, and they're oftentimes altered through motions and things of that nature. But ultimately, the rack will come up with one consensus as to what the region recommends the division do on that recommendation. And so we go through those 5 regions, make those presentations, and each region then takes their recommendation to what is the wildlife board, who ultimately makes the decision on what gets implemented. And so that's how the public voice is heard through what's a more standard process for the division is we make proposals to those racks. The public voices their concerns in their representative regional racks. The rack board takes the region's and public's opinion to the wildlife board, and the wildlife board ultimately makes a decision from there on what occurs. And so if you're not familiar with the rack schedule or process, we have all that stuff online. So if you're not sure where to get your voice heard, or where you're able to voice your opinion on a given topic, that rack process is typically the best avenue for the public.
Awesome. And I've been to those rack meetings, for you all that are listening. And yes, exactly what Wyatt said. You can go online to the website and find out when those meetings are going to be held in your region. But if you're into hunting and wildlife and things like that, those rack meetings are really good. to attend. There's a lot of discussion, a really good discussion. They present a lot of good information about possible changes that may be coming up, and like Wyatt said, you're able to express, or you can, and some of them express, your thoughts and feelings in those different situations. And so I've really gleaned a lot of information from those RAC meetings. It's been a long time since I've been to one, but I'm excited to be back in Utah and be able to start attending those again. So thank you, Wyatt, for explaining that for those that aren't familiar with that whole process.
My pleasure.
So let's jump back into this House bill a little bit, and let's kind of get into the weeds and the details of it. We put a few bullet points up on our website in our article, but would you mind just taking a few minutes and kind of explaining the details around this new House bill and the regulations that go along with it?
Yeah, so the House bill covered three different things. House Bill 295 covered three different things. One was it asked the Wildlife Board to establish some sort of regulation on trail cameras, which we can discuss if you want to. It also talked about baiting, which has been the hot topic lately, and it talked about guiding on waterfowl management areas. As it pertains to baiting, basically it defines what bait is. I'll go ahead and read it for your public just so that we're on the same page here. 1 second.
No problem.
It says bait means intentionally placing food or nutrient substances to manipulate the behavior of wildlife for the purposes of taking or attempting to take big game. And then it goes on to say that bait does not include like salt and things that agricultural producers would put out for their cattle. And again, that has to be put out by the producer for their cattle specifically. Standing crops, things like that aren't considered bait. So it defines what bait is and then tells you, when you're legally allowed to harvest or how you can use bait. To put it simply, you can put bait out during preseason hunting in Utah. Other states are different, but in Utah, the way this code reads and the way we're enforcing it, you can preseason bait for big game species. You just can't harvest an animal over that bait. So basically what that entails is put out bait in July. You have to pick it up before your hunt, and then you can hunt deer or elk or whatever in that area. The question we often get or are getting a lot is, how long before the season do I have to pick that bait up in order to not break the law? And there's nothing in this code that defines what a time frame. It simply says that it can't be manipulating the movements of big game species. So if you put out, bait in July and you pull it the day before the season, and the next day a deer or elk, coming to or from that bait pile, and his movements are being altered because of that bait that was there, that is still unlawful to harvest that animal. You have to ensure that the animal you're taking, its movements are not being manipulated by the bait that you had out there previously. So that's different than, let's say, Wyoming, that doesn't allow baiting of any kind during any time of the year.
Mm-hmm. Boy, let me unpack that just a little bit. So I've got my trail cameras out right now, and I think I know the answers. I'm just doing this for clarification. My trail cameras are out right now. I got critter licks sitting in front of them right now. That's okay, right? There's no problem with that, right?
Yep, that is 100% legal.
Perfect. So this year in Utah, I didn't draw any tags. I won't have any licenses in my pocket at any point this year. So the way that reads, where I won't be harvesting any animals this year in Utah, technically I could bait for my trail camera purposes all year long. Is that correct?
Yep, that would be correct. The word of caution I'd offer there is that let's say you tell a friend about that bait, and they ultimately harvested an animal over that bait or going to or from that bait. Even though it's not their bait, they're still harvesting big game over bait. So you could, if you're not careful, you could get your friends or family in trouble in that fashion. But yes, as you stated, that would be completely legal. Run bait all year round, just as long as you're not harvesting or someone is not harvesting big game over bait.
Okay. And from a citation perspective, if, say, that was to happen and a family member was to harvest that animal, they would be cited for that, not myself, right? Not the person that put the bait out and the trail camera out. It'd be the person that actually harvested that big game animal, correct?
So yeah, it'd be based on intent. So if the person that harvested that knew the bait was there and hunted and harvested that animal because of the bait, they're certainly at odds with this regulation. However, we also have a code called aiding and assisting, where basically depending on your level of culpability and involvement, you can be charged for like crimes. So that doesn't mean that the person who put out the bait is free and clear. We'd obviously look at it and decide, did they know that person was going to go hunt, or, that nature. But you're not necessarily free and clear. You could be subject to some violations, but we just look at that on a case-by-case basis.
Perfect. I think that's fantastic information, because I did worry about that, honestly. I worried that people would put out the bait and for their trail cameras and then have all these pictures and say, okay, well, I can't do this, but you go ahead and do it. And so thinking that there'd be nothing on them. So I thank you so much for clarifying that.
No problem.
So I guess one of the biggest questions I had that came in, and you basically answered this, was like, what are the dates? What are the dates for when I have to stop baiting to when I can start baiting again for trail camera purposes, or for whatever purpose people bait animals? But it's really not technically date driven. It's basically just don't do it during the hunt, kind of a thing.
Yeah, and just make sure that if you do put out bait, that you're not harvesting something that's coming back to that bait, whether it's there or not. But yeah, in all these substitutes that this bill saw, there was at one time a date range in which you could have bait out or not have bait out, but that didn't make it through the final revision, obviously, to the code that we currently have. So just be cautious. I think if people know or feel like they're pushing the limits, or like animals still maybe come to this because I didn't pull it very long ago, I'd caution them to err on the side of not harvesting an animal there, just so that they're not getting themselves into a tight spot. I think people that go about this honestly, they won't have any issues. And our goal is to catch the people that are blatantly trying to do it and doing it to their advantage. But preseason bait, just make sure that you don't push the line and have animals still coming to that you're harvesting.
Wyatt, I really appreciate your perspective in that, like you personally, and I'm sure that all of your officers in the field with you are the same way, but I love how you respond to these questions, and you truly look at intent behind it. If I would imagine that if there was no intent and it was just, it just kind of happened that way, that it'd be a completely different situation than, like you said, if it's that person that's out there blatantly, they've got a big pile of critter lick and they shoot that elk right on top of it, then we're okay. You're doing something wrong.
Yep. Exactly. Yep. Those are the individuals that as long as they knew about the baiting law, that just totally disregard it, that are essentially stealing opportunity from the rest of us. Those are the individuals that we're hoping to address things from. We're not looking to address, or spend a ton of effort on the people that have historically put salt down, let's say, and it's leaked into the ground, and they haven't put salt out for a year or two, but it's still there, and they're not putting new salt out. Those aren't the people. They're trying to obey the law, and we will certainly work with those people. It's the people that know the law and just blatantly disregard it that we're hoping to catch.
Well, I'm so grateful for that perspective. I honestly am, because that would be my scenario, I'm sure, because I have been putting salt out for a very long time in certain areas, and
sure.
It just kind of, like you said, it just settles into the ground, and animals keep coming back to that area just because it's it's been there for quite a while. And so I really do appreciate that perspective, and I know that my listeners are the same way, and appreciate your guys' approach on that. So thank you for that. Does this have anything? Let me start over with that. Is this species specific? Is it just big game? Is it bears, turkeys? What species does this include?
So yeah, it's specific to big game. So waterfowl will have its own baiting. They have a time frame in the waterfowl that bait has to be removed for 10 days, and then you can hunt that area. Turkey still has the same regulations that you can't harvest over bait. So this particular code is specific to big game.
Okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying that, because that is another question that has come up quite often. Is, does this change the way I turkey hunt or bear hunt or whatever? So
yeah, bear will remain the same. You just get your COR for a bait station and get all that cleared through the division, and you're good there. So yeah, baiting for bear is still lawful as long as you get the permits that you need or the approvals.
I hate to jump down a rabbit hole, but I'm going to do it because baiting for bears is such a big, kind of a hot topic, because every state is so much different. Now, in Utah, there are seasons that you can bait for bears. There's seasons you can use dogs. Is that still the case? I'm sorry for my ignorance here.
Yep. Nope, you're no problem at all. And I'm not super familiar with bear hunting as far as the details, but yeah, I know enough about it to speak on it for sure. But we have, the baiting season, the dog season, we have spot and sock type stuff. So all those historical methods for taking bears are still in place. Nothing has been altered outside of what would be changed every year as far as season dates and permit numbers and things of that nature. But as far as methods, they're all in place and the same as they've always been.
Okay, cool. Appreciate that. You'd mentioned going back to the House bill, and thank you for answering these questions. And I've got a few more as it relates to baiting and kind of when everything goes into place. But you'd mentioned the trail camera changes with this new House bill. Would you mind touching on that just a little bit and telling our listeners a little bit about the details on that?
Yeah, sure. So as I stated, the House bill had three different kind of things it touched on, one of which is trail cameras, and it didn't establish any regulations on trail cameras. It just said that the Wildlife Board, which is the board we talked about with the rack and board process, is tasked with creating regulations for trail cameras. It didn't give any guidance as to what that should be. They basically wanted the Wildlife Board and the racks to get public opinion to help create what that regulation should look like. And so we did a technology survey, which largely consisted of trail camera questions, but it also had things like night vision. People supported or opposed the use of night vision for big game stuff. That clarified some of our definitions for like muzzleloader, but a big aspect of that was trail camera stuff to help decide how we could propose a recommendation there. So that nothing will change in this current big game season, the 2021 season, but you will see either in November or April, forgive me if my dates are a little off, but they're not going to be off by much, but in the rack and board process in November or April, you'll see recommendations coming from the division on trail cameras, on night vision, on a number of those technologies that we did a survey on. The public will be able to provide input, support or oppose the division's recommendation and figure out a solution that's best for the public. But you'll see that likely have something in effect for the 2022 big game hunting season. But as it stands right now, all trail cameras are lawful. Run them year round, run them for whatever you want. Just be on the lookout for a little bit of a change for the 2022 season as it pertains to trail cameras.
Okay. I love trail cameras. I do use them for hunting a little bit, but honestly, I just use them because I like taking, really cool pictures of animals, and so I hope that it doesn't get changed too much. But and this is kind of becoming a commercial for the rack meetings, but that's another good reason to go to those rack meetings, and just like you just said, Wyatt, I mean, you guys, it's going to be brought up in the next couple sessions, and so for you guys that are listening, make sure that you attend those. If you love running trail cameras and want to be involved in it, make sure that you attend those and make sure that your opinion is heard during those public hearings, and let your voice be heard. So you said that won't go into, that those changes wouldn't happen this year and wouldn't go into effect until possibly the hunting season for 2022. As far as this House bill that we're talking about with the new baiting changes, is that in effect as of right now, or will that go into effect later? What's the dates on that?
Yeah, so that went into effect on May 5th. So here a couple months ago. So the baiting aspect of that is currently in place. and has been for a couple months.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. I want to kind of end. This might take us down a few more, a few more rabbit holes here. But
Happy to do it, man. That's what I'm here for, is to answer your question.
well, I appreciate that, especially these ones on the fly as well. But I just keep thinking about enforcing this, and you guys have a tough job. I don't know how you all do it, and I swear if I was to ever do anything wrong, then one of you guys would be standing right there next to me. But I know there's a lot of people that do stuff and get away with it, and nobody ever knows. And so, have you thought about how you all are going to enforce this? Do you feel like it's going to be difficult to enforce?
There's certainly some challenges associated with it. I mean, the easiest case we'll have is we're sitting there and we watch someone shoot a big game animal over a bait pile. Obviously, those are the people we're trying to catch, and that's going to be a challenge to make that happen. And as far as if a deer is moving to and from a bait pile that was there, I mean, there's some certain challenges with determining if this law has been violated or not. But we've got a running list of reports that have already come in regarding baiting that we're keeping tabs on to kind of see when these bait piles are removed and monitor what gets harvested in these areas. And so it will take a notable amount of time and effort on our end. One, because it's a new law and we're trying to figure out what challenges are associated with the new law. And then in some places of the code, it's a little vague with no dates or something that you've referenced earlier. So there'll be some work on our end to do, but we're pretty confident we have a good idea of how we want to approach this. But there's some challenges there.
Yeah, I just kept thinking about that it would be hard to. Well, I shouldn't say hard. It just maybe, like you said, there may be just some challenges that will come along with this, and I would imagine, you may rely on a lot of just public reporting, honestly, of people that see different things, see people hunting over bait or whatever. I'm sure that'll kind of play into it as well.
Yeah, that's largely what we've been operating on right now. Is we've had a fairly decent number of reports of bait piles put out, because when this bill originally came out, we weren't sure if it prohibited preseason baiting or not. And so it took us a little bit of time and discussion to clearly identify what this bill was trying to tackle. And so it took us a while to get some information out to the public. And in the meantime, guys are going into sportsmen's and buying trophy rocks and different supplements, and people are reporting that to us because it wasn't clear if all baiting was illegal or not. But we've got that all hashed out. We've been notified about a number of bait piles that are currently on the landscape, and like I said, we're monitoring those to see if we have any foul play during the hunting seasons there. So hopefully we don't, but we've got resources on the ground working on stuff currently.
Oh, well, wonderful. That's awesome. And I am really glad that this doesn't, at this point, impact, preseason baiting from a personal level, because that's where I really do most of my, if I do baiting, that's where I'll do baiting. It's just because I love, once hunting starts, I'm into hunting, and I don't really use trail cameras and things like that, or bait, I should say, to hunt. And so, most of my baiting is for preseason scouting with trail cameras, and I honestly just love it to take pictures. So I'm glad to have the clarification that this doesn't impact preseason baiting. We can still do that. We can still put those bait piles out in front of our cameras and enjoy, just seeing those animals in different elements. So what about
all this could change in the future, so just keep your ear to the ground. So you never know what may come of legislation or rack and board processes. So, but that's where we stand right now, for sure.
It is an ever-changing thing. I look at, sorry to go down another rabbit hole, but Arizona, now I believe they completely ban trail cameras now. Is that right?
Yep, that's our understanding as well.
Wow. So that's the thing is, it definitely could change. And, I think for a lot of people is you gotta really look at both sides here. I know there's a lot of people that have gotten emotional or taken the emotion side of this, and think that this is a true attack on hunters, and it really truly isn't. And that's one thing I love about talking with you and everybody at the DWR is, there are good reasons behind this that have been researched and analyzed, and so I appreciate that. One other question that I had for you, Wyatt, as it relates to citations and that kind of stuff, is what does the citations, for lack of better words, what does the punishment look like if someone is caught harvesting a big game animal over bait?
Yeah, it goes, every case is different, so we obviously look at the intent behind it to start off with, and then that kind of helps us guides our direction on how we address the situation. But if a citation or knowing intentional violation occurs, it can range anywhere from a Class B misdemeanor to a third-degree felony, depending on the animal and or the size of the animal that you harvest, or whoever harvests unlawfully over bait. So could be anywhere from a warning of, you didn't know, we need you to know, and here's a learning lesson, to you knew and chose not to obey the law and potentially face third-degree felony charges. Tied with that, again, based on the situation, could come license suspensions and obviously court fines that are associated with those types of things. So could be fairly stiff if the person chooses to violate this.
Well, I hope that puts the fear in some people not to do it.
Yeah. A third-degree felony would not be a fun charge to get. So, but that kind of speaks to the volume of concern you could be facing if you want to kind of push the envelope there.
So, you mentioned in there the size of the animal. So, would it be different if someone harvested a small, little forked horn mule deer, or if they harvested a 400-inch bull elk? Would that fine look different, or the citation look different for each of those?
Yeah, so a trophy deer is a third-degree felony. Trophy deer is any deer that's 24 inches or wider outside spread. Doesn't go off a score, doesn't go off of points, just goes by off of inches of antler as far as width goes. Any elk's a felony, although if you shoot an elk with a 6 point on one side or greater, then that can increase your suspension time as well as a trophy deer. So that's what drives the increase in charges and increases in suspension time. Is I don't like to use the term because all deer are important, but the caliber of deer in which you harvest or elk is defined in code and drives some of those suspensions and fines.
Okay. And
ultimately charges.
This is kind of going back to the conversation you and I had about poaching, and it sounds like it's kind of a similar process. Not exactly the same, but there are some similarities there.
Yeah, it would essentially, if you kill an animal illegally over bait, it's essentially poaching and would follow those same guidelines and guidances that we've talked about in the past on this show.
Okay. Would that go under? Sorry, I'm getting into the weeds here, but would that be reported as a poaching and would go towards the poaching numbers for the year?
Yeah. So any what we'll define as a poaching is just basically a very loose term used for wildlife that's taken unlawfully. Okay. So if you go fishing, you have a fishing license that say the limit's 4 trout and you catch 5, that would go into our unlawful take or poaching numbers, however you want to word it, as one illegal fish. And so it'd be applied the same to big game. If you kill a deer at night, or kill a deer over bait, or shoot a deer without a license, that would all go into our poaching or unlawful take numbers for the year.
Okay. Awesome. And you're probably thinking, wow, Taryn, you already asked me those questions. I can't believe you're asking me those questions again. But I know that we do have new listeners that probably haven't listened to yours and my last podcast. So I wanted to make sure that we got that out there. And I remember you talking about that it is any unlawful harvesting of an animal goes into those numbers, or just like you said, even with fish, it still goes into those numbers. So,
and I want to make it clear that the word poaching or poached animal or poacher may be used, but we completely understand that some things are done on accident, and we don't attach any type of a stigma, and would hope that the general public doesn't attach any type of a stigma of a poacher to someone that did something on accident. We have plenty of those accidents every year, especially in waterfowl with misidentification of birds, and those people certainly aren't bad people. There are bad people out there, but not everybody that shoots something illegally is a bad person in the slightest.
Yeah. You and I kind of talked about that last time. Is mistakes happen, and I think you said that the best thing honestly to do is just self-report. Just be upfront and honest. Let Wyatt and his team know what happened. Just, hey, I made a mistake. I didn't know about this, or hey, this happened and by accident, shot, like you said, shot the wrong bird, or whatever the case may be. But I would just say, just be upfront and honest with Wyatt and his team, and I think you're probably going to be better off. I guess I don't mean to put words in your mouth, Wyatt, but we kind of had that feeling on our last call.
Yeah, we certainly have a lot of respect and appreciation for someone that does the right thing when they realize that something has gone wrong, and that is most certainly factored into our decisions.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. That's very cool of you, because we are human. We do make mistakes, and especially us as hunters, we're not the most educated people in the world. I'm just kidding. We try. We definitely try, and I hope that people do try to educate themselves. Listen to the podcasts like this. If you're going to be hunting in a specific state, take the time to learn the regulations, know what you can and can't do. If you're baiting, if you're trapping, if you're fishing, whatever you're doing, make sure you know the regulations that come along with it. So, Wyatt, that pretty much covers that House bill, and I appreciate you explaining the details of it. And I know it makes me feel a little bit more comfortable about what I'm doing and how I can approach things, and I hope it does our listeners. Was there anything else about that bill or baiting in specific that we didn't touch on that you wanted to share?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. If you have questions, call a regional office. If you know your local conservation officer, give them a call. We'd much rather you ask a question and get the right answer than assume or guess and go out there and accidentally do something wrong. If you have we have a frequently asked questions page on our division website at wildlife.utah.gov specific to baiting and the questions that we're getting regularly on baiting. If you want to go on that web page, on the top right corner, there's a search bar. If you just type baiting in there, it'll be the first thing that pulls up, and you can look at these frequently asked questions to make sure that you're on the right track. For example, if an agricultural producer puts out salt for his cows, can I harvest a big game animal over that? And you can. But all those specifics are detailed on our website if you want to refer to those.
And I'll put a link to that in the show notes of this show, just so you guys, if you don't remember the website. I'm on that website frequently. I'm always looking for different questions different answers, I should say, to questions that I have. And so that website is a fantastic resource for whether you're in-state, out-of-state hunter. It's amazing. So I'll put a link in the show notes to the website so that you guys can go check it out. So, well, Wyatt, thank you so much for joining me and talking through this. I think, like I said, I think this will put a lot of people at ease. Hopefully, take a little bit of the emotion out of this whole bill. It'll be a change for some folks. It may, in their eyes, hinder the way that they hunt. But really, it's good to know the reasons behind it, what it truly looks like, and then understand what could happen if you don't obey that law. So I appreciate you coming on. Appreciate all the information that you shared with us today.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Cool. All right. Well, sir, I will let you. I'll let you back to your day. I'm sure that I'll be reaching out in the near future for a lot more questions from you, and maybe when I'm up in northern Utah, maybe we can actually sit down together and record one of these.
Yeah, holler for sure. That'd be a blast. And if you ever need a law enforcement opinion from the division, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to provide it.
Definitely will. Yeah, absolutely will. So, all right. Thank you, sir. You enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, buddy.
All right. See ya.
Bye.